Harlan first glimpsed her, sprawled in the scorching earth of the Oklahoma plains. For an instant, he imagined the sun had hurled her there, intent on ending her. Her gown was ripped, her flesh was burned, her lips were split wide as if pleading silently for relief. The vast sky offered none. Jacob had encountered corpses on the frontier in the past, but never one clinging to existence with so little strength remaining. He was patrolling the boundary along the Chisel Trail that morning. The warmth wavered across the terrain as though the ground itself exhaled flames. His mount halted abruptly, ears alert and forward. That's when Jacob noticed a subtle quiver in the soil. Scarcely a stir, more like a faint murmur from someone too frail to utter a sound. He dismounted, his boots pressing into the heated ground, and crouched next to her. Her breathing rasped in her chest, her lids quivered, weighted like boulders. Then her gaze fixed on the water flask at his side. Her mouth parted just wide enough for a fractured murmur to escape. "Place it on my tongue." Those words struck the space between them with a raw urgency that left Jacob chilled, even in the blaze. He eased an arm beneath her back and raised her head gently. A thin stream of liquid met her palate. She drew in a sharp breath, like one savoring existence anew after being convinced it had ended. Then her fingers gripped his forearm with unexpected force, as though that single sip anchored the entire universe. "Take it slow," he murmured. "Rushing it could do more harm." She paid no mind. She drifted somewhere between this realm and the unknown beyond, inching her way back, her frame quaking from sheer weariness. Her features were flushed and raw. A lengthy path of disturbed soil trailed behind her, revealing she'd journeyed far, perhaps all through the darkness. Jacob had witnessed women fleeing before in this untamed territory, but he'd never seen one drive herself beyond the edge where even the plains appeared poised to claim her. As he tipped a bit more moisture past her lips, the distant thud of hooves resounded. A solitary horseman crested the hill. He reined in his steed and peered downward. From his vantage, it resembled an aged cattleman bent over a youthful lady who lay motionless. The horseman lingered a moment too long, wheeled his animal around, and spurred toward Abilene. A knot formed deep in Jacob's belly. Tales in Abilene spread swifter than gunfire and warped just as readily. He turned his attention back to the woman. Her grasp loosened feebly on his hand, as if releasing it might plunge her eternally into the parched ground. Her lips quivered, her tones splintered like brittle timber in flames. "Has he located me?" That lone inquiry froze Jacob more than the vision of her shattered form, and it stirred a doubt he wasn't prepared to face. Who was she fleeing? And what sort of soul would abandon a young woman to perish beneath the Oklahoma sun like this? Jacob scooped the woman into his embrace, the way one cradles a fragile object fearing it might shatter at the slightest error. She weighed little, far too slight for her years, and her head settled against his torso as though she hadn't known security in ages. The plains breeze persisted in swirling grit over his stirrups, almost as if scheming to conceal her once more, but Jacob gripped her closer and bore her to his horse. By the hour he arrived at Harlan Homestead beside the Red River, the daylight was dipping toward the horizon, and the day's swelter was at last receding. His modest dwelling waited silently amid the willows, the sort of hush that had shadowed him since his spouse departed. He nudged the entrance ajar with his heel and placed the woman on the sole fresh pallet in the space. For a heartbeat, he paused, gazing at her countenance, questioning if she'd endure till morning. She rose just sufficiently to whisper disjointed phrases, laced mostly with dread. "Please, keep him from discovering me." Jacob dampened a rag with water and cleansed the grime from her brow. Her respiration evened enough to loosen the vice around his ribs. He placed a vessel on the hearth and simmered legumes, just as he'd prepared them countless times prior. Only now, the room carried an altered essence. Another pulse echoed within these walls,
another cause to stoke the embers. He ladled a modest portion of stock past her lips, and she accepted it, even in slumber, like one starved for solace over long seasons. When the fever surged, it arrived swiftly. Her entire being convulsed, her jaws clacked despite the cozy air. Jacob remained at her side, applying a chilled cloth to her cheeks repeatedly until the shudders eased. He'd once beheld illness claim the partner of his heart, and that recollection tore at him anew. "Not once more," he breathed, "not while I draw breath to prevent it." Through the unglazed pane drifted the yips of jackals across the waterway. Ordinarily, he tuned them out, but this evening they unsettled him. He couldn't dispel the image of that horseman who'd spied them on the plains. A fellow like that might warp an innocent scene into malice, particularly if he whispered it to the misguided listeners in Abilene, and especially if the figure she dreaded was already hunting her. Just ere daybreak, the woman shifted and gazed at the rafters overhead. She breathed her name, Rose Delaney. Her camber was faint, yet it bore more sorrow than any cry. Jacob inquired what had transpired, but she merely shook her head and pressed her cheek to the cushion. Whatever peril she'd fled still pursued her through visions. Beyond the threshold, dawn's initial gleam kissed the stream. Within, Rose attempted to rise, and Jacob supported her lest she topple. She locked eyes with his for the first instance, and an element in her expression halted him. It was terror, indeed, but laced with a subdued faith. And that's when Jacob comprehended a truth that prickled the nape of his neck. If she genuinely escaped a pursuer, as she implied, then a searcher from Abilene would arrive before long. Yet the query gnawing at his core was stark and burdensome. Would they seek Rose Delaney, or the fellow bold enough to shield her? The dawn following Rose's revelation, Jacob ventured out to draw water from the stream. The crisp breeze soothed his skin, but a burden lingered in his midsection, unyielding. Something approached. He sensed it like a seasoned mare detects thunder prior to clouds gathering. By midday, he discerned horsemen on the distant line, 3 in number. Their outlines sliced cleanly against the light as they traversed the expanse toward his spread. Jacob required no further deliberation. Folk didn't venture this remote without purpose, and they sought it urgently. Rose perched at the bench, frail yet alert, a coverlet draped her frame. At the clamor of approaching mounts, her utensil tumbled from her grasp, her stare riveted to the portal, as if anticipating the fiend incarnate. Jacob rested a palm on her arm. "Remain within," he instructed, but she declined with a tilt, knowing that concealment altered nothing. The lead rider drew up before the abode. One bore the insignia of a lawman from Abilene. The next clutched a dossier swollen with documents. The last was Silas Thorne, attired in polished garb, and perched erect on his saddle like one convinced the realm owed him tribute.
Thorne gestured toward Rose through the yawning frame. "There she rests. She's mine by right, and that rancher Shelcher's a fugitive." The lawman coughed lightly, striving for authority. "A grievance has been lodged asserting this lady is bound by agreement. That pact demands service and recompense. She departed unpaid. We're tasked with reclaiming her." Rose's stance buckled near collapse. Jacob positioned himself squarely betwixt her and the trio, without a second thought. His tone remained even, yet steel underpinned it. "She is no chattel, no beast bartered at market, and she most assuredly is not yours." Thorne grinned, the manner of a viper poised to lunge. "The writ declares differently, Harlan. Justice favors me, unless you intend to challenge it with coin." The lawman inclined his head. "You possess till sunrise to journey to Abilene and resolve this lawfully.
Otherwise, we'll escort her away by compulsion, per the terms." They wheeled their steeds and departed, trailing haze in the courtyard. Rose braced the lintel, gasping. Jacob observed their retreat, teeth clenched, aware he'd confront a history long buried. And as the haze gradually cleared, one query ascended like vapor amid them. "If you reckon yourself the sort who discerns reality swifter than the common crowd, then demonstrate it now, and reveal your response." Jacob found no rest that eve. He lingered at the trestle with a lantern flickering dimly, gazing at the sheaf the lawman had thrust upon him. The accord weighed like lead, though merely slender pages of script and deceit. Rose slumbered in the adjacent chamber, her breaths gentle, and each nuance evoked the peril awaiting in Abilene at first light. He decanted a mug of brew and permitted it to chill untouched. His thoughts looped relentlessly, deliberate and unyielding as a weary draft animal. Should he enter Abilene, he'd stride into the lair of predators. Yet tarrying here meant Rose would be hauled to an existence that would erode her gradually. The notion constricted his breast. When daybreak at last filtered through the casement, Rose emerged from her quarters, shawl enfolding her. She appeared improved from the prior day, but her limbs remained unsteady, her inflection slender, and the heat had scarcely waned. She advanced cautiously, as one whose form yet pondered survival. "You needn't undertake this," she confided softly. "I'm merely a burden." Jacob negated with a shake. "Burden or otherwise," he replied. "No honorable soul permits another to be dragged into torment merely because society deems it permissible." Rose offered no retort. She regarded him with blended thanks and apprehension, as if daunted by deliverance, yet equally by its absence. They departed abreast. As daylight ascended, the waterway ribboning in their wake like molten silver. The passage to Abilene spanned half the daylight, and Jacob felt his pulse quicken with proximity. The settlement hummed upon their entry, drovers hollering, carts clattering, ladies brushing grit from verandas destined to gather more by midday. Jacob secured his horse beyond the tavern, the very spot where Thorn had erected his domain of spirits and obligation. Rose faltered, but Jacob met her with a firm glance. "Keep near. Allow me the discourse within." Thorn loomed at the counter, his smirk that of one presuming triumph. "Ah, Harlan," he drawled, "I figured you'd appear."
"Types like you forever aspire to knighthood, but knights forfeit more than most." Jacob arrayed the parchments on a surface and declared to Thorn the sum he offered. It was a steep toll, one to make any herder balk. Thorn reclined, digits interlaced, gaze alight with avarice. He savored each instant of Jacob's discomfort. To him, this was mere diversion. Thorn drummed the documents with a languid digit and lifted his visage, the posture of a predator bearing fangs sans growl. He consented to endorse, but solely if Jacob yielded a swath of pasture by the stream, the parcel Jacob had guarded since his beloved's passing. Ere a breath could pass, Thorn chuckled, a parched rasp, and murmured that the terrain would yield to him regardless. The tavern suspended animation as Jacob fixed upon that rapacious leer, comprehending the levy had just redoubled. But upon Jacob's latter words, the chamber fell mute. He confronted Thorn squarely and uttered the phrase that caused Rose to clutch her seat's rim. "This day I purchase her liberty, not your consent." The scribe inscribed the pact, the lawman attested it, Thorn inscribed, though his mandible spasmed with ire. And thus, Rose Delaney Harper emerged unbound. With the populace half observing, they crossed into the radiance beyond. Yet the atmosphere hung dense, almost cautioning that the tale lingered unfinished. But precisely as Rose crossed into daylight as a liberated soul, an alteration crossed Jacob Harlan's visage. The sort signaling the narrative persists, far from concluded.
When Jacob and Rose departed Abilene that afternoon, the orb shone fiercely enough to gild the eaves, but warmth eluded them both. Freedom exacted a toll, and Jacob had tendered near all he possessed. Nonetheless, as they veered from the clamor of the outpost and returned to the serene ribbon by the stream, a subtle transformation stirred in the ether encircling them. Yet peril propagates rapidly across the borderlands, and ere they attained the spread, a courier bore tidings from a creditor long overlooked. An ancient liability, one Thorne had discreetly acquired and reassigned the preceding day. The missive decreed the homestead forfeit in 30 turns of the sun. Upon completion of the filings, most of his pastures would revert to the creditor, leaving merely the modest plot encircling the dwelling and the structure alone. It commenced modestly, akin to the twinge heralding showers after prolonged aridity. Rose glanced rearward repeatedly, not toward Abilene, but at the existence she'd forsaken, an existence she deemed inescapable, one that had sought to shatter her, then discard her amid the loam to expire. And still, she endured, still inhaled, still pressed onward beside a man amply justified in prioritizing himself, yet who refrained. On reaching the spread, it seemed altered from before. That twilight, Jacob strolled to the remote verge of his domain, the identical expanse Thorne had coveted. He lingered there, the summons clutched in his fist, while gusts plucked at his jacket. And Rose positioned herself adjacent, a spade propped on her frame. They exchanged no utterances. Two shadows etched against the waning light, confronting the territory they stood to surrender, neither inclined to yield. It was the brand of quietude that might fracture a spirit, or forge it, and in that instant, it forged them. The identical gritty enclosure, the identical willows by the flow, but now a budding essence sprouted through the fissures of their forefactures. Rose alighted from the saddle and traced her palm along the timber balustrade, as if saluting a haven that might at last embrace her. Across the ensuing fortnights, the spread evolved into a fresh sanctuary, diminished from erstwhile, unadorned, yet vibrant in a manner absent for eras. Rose sowed a modest furrow of produce. Jacob mended the fowl enclosure, his weathered grasp proceeding with a resolution he'd presumed vanished. Kinfolk who'd formerly maintained reserve now inclined heads in subdued esteem. None termed Rose an asset henceforth, none ventured. Certain evenings they reclined on the gallery, lanterns' glow spilling through the ajar portal. Rose would share visions of pursuit she cherished, and Jacob would attend with the endurance born solely of one season to discern essentials. He aspired not to knighthood, he merely elected solidarity, and at times, that suffices for redemption. And perhaps that's the wisdom nestled in this weathered yarn. At times, the boldest act a fella can enact is safeguarding one bereft of all. At times, the boldest act a lady can enact is embracing her merit beyond the anguish she evaded. And at times, the existence erected post-tempest surpasses the one relinquished pre its onset. Now, permit me to pose something only the keenest observers perceive. Within your own path, who merits your defense, even should the realm bid you withdraw? And who merits your acceptance of aid, even when solitude and strife seem simpler? Every soul tenders a levy in this existence, but that levy's merit is gauged by the one you elect to preserve, and at times, forfeiting terrain or funds or ease pales beside the prospect of uprightness in your chronicle. If this narrative stirs you in any measure, favor it with a nod that others might encounter it, and if you crave further chronicles from the elder territories, recounted to pierce the spirit a touch profounder, then proceed and join the fold. I assure you, the next tale already gallops hither. So, let me ask this, and solely the keenest will venture reply. What singular element in your existence merits surrendering all else?